that was the only thing I remember from Ancient Aliens. They would show that 100 times.
Oh yeah, they keep showing that.
Dude, he's in a rocket ship. He took off. You're like,
right. So this is the famous or infamous image of a Maya rocket. That is actually a lid of a coffin, of a sarcophagus, of a great ruler whose name was Quinichana-Pacal. And he ruled a place that we know today as Palenque. Beautiful, beautiful site in Mexico. And yeah, when they found his tomb in the 1950s, you know, this beautiful coffin with this carving.
And like, I don't know, I always hear things on like TV and YouTube where it's like, some claim they go back to like 60 million years, you know, something like crazy. Because I mean, that must have really chapped your ass watching Ancient Aliens back in the day. Did you like that show?
You know, I've been asked to be on that show several times.
Really?
And
you wouldn't play ball about the outer space travel, or what was the problem?
Man, well, the thing is, I know from experience that, well, I should say, that show to me is just nonsense.
Really?
The real human story of these places and the monuments is, I think, the real story that's just as compelling. But yeah, I mean, I was invited to be on a few of those shows, and what I realized from a long time ago is that when you get interviewed for a show like that as an expert, quote unquote,
yeah,
of course you have no control over how they're going to edit it or how they're going to display what you say or chop you up.
That kind of sucks. Actually, you spend your whole life trying to be like a credible.
Yeah, so I've actually had friends and colleagues who, you know, say, yeah, I'll do that, sure, you know, and I kind of get that, right? You want to be out there and talk, but then they just kind of, you know, manipulate whatever you're going to say, you know, for their narrative, right? But yeah, I mean, as someone who studies the Maya and has been around the people, has been around these amazing sites in Mexico and Guatemala and Belize, you know, the whole Ancient Aliens narrative, it's coming from another place. It's coming from our, you know, kind of background in trying to struggle how to explain these places. That's an old struggle that goes back hundreds of years, actually. But the thing is, now we have the history. This is what people don't realize. We have the names of the people who built these monuments. And they're not aliens, they're people. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
And they're doing the same stuff we do. And they have the same concerns.
In the Aztecs, and there was like the ritual human sacrifice. Was that the Mayans? Was that kind of like...
They did some of that, sure. Yeah. Maybe not on the scale of the Aztecs, or at least on the scale of what the Spanish talk about for the Aztecs. Some of that's exaggerated.
Yeah, I've heard that.
But sacrifice was real. It was part of their... In Mesoamerica in general, we study that, we acknowledge it. One of the things about sacrifice that's hard for us to think about is that, and here I'm kind of thinking about examples that I have come across in my own research. You know, for the Maya, for example, there were ritual, like executions of war captives. And that's kind of cross-cultural. I mean, we call that sacrifice. Yeah, but it's like a Roman gladiator, you know, arena. Yeah, or you know, which is very like performative and very ritualized. But it's a way of kind of dealing with your enemies and your captives in this kind of this way of going about executing them, right?
Yeah, I mean that's like pretty. I would say that's pretty common. I mean, even the Spanish were like cutting people's heads off and hanging them on sticks. Yeah. I think the cannibalism thing is what gets people kind of if they were. I don't know if they were munching. But if you're also just munching warriors.
I think there was some of that in ancient Mesoamerica. In the Americas, it's in a lot of places in the world.
I don't hold it against them. I mean, it was a long time ago. I'm not.
No, it is hard to wrap our heads around in some ways. But the indigenous people in the 1600s and 1500s were also recounting and the Cortez, but the Aguilar story, yeah. So Cortez, when he first arrives on the coast of Yucatan, the Maya that they are in contact with realize, wait a minute, we've seen one of these weirdos before who was like floating in a boat. And the Maya realize, oh, there's this slave who's one of these bearded, you know, white guys who speaks the same language, right? And so they get him. They bring him in and communicate. And it turns out it was the shipwrecked Spanish sailor who by that time was fluent in speaking Maya. And eventually he links up with Cortez. Cortez now has someone who can communicate for him. Without that, Cortez would not have been able to go very far. But the other part of this, it's an amazing story. Eventually, they link up with another Maya kingdom, and interact with them. And this is where Malinche comes from. This is the woman who eventually becomes Cortez's mistress.
Yeah. He strangles his wife.
She's a
he
princess.
strangles his wife for
Right. She's crazy. A princess. She speaks Maya and she speaks the language of the Aztecs.
Yeah.
So between those two, Aguilar and between the Spanish sailor and Malinche, they can actually converse. And Cortez is a master manipulator, right? That comes across in all these stories. Yeah. And he's talking to the Aztec emperors and, through these two. And they're actually having conversations. So it's just amazing to me that all came together.
Yeah.
And it was just by chance in some ways. But again, that's part of how extraordinary this story is.
Yeah. And
huge question. And this is the thing that I think a lot of people think about when you think about the ancient Maya, is this idea of collapse. Mm-hmm. And I often get this question like, well, what happened to them? Because, didn't they disappear? Mm-hmm. And that's a common narrative out there, that the ancient Maya just disappeared, which is kind of problematic because the Maya are still around. So as a people, they didn't disappear. But what did disappear is that around 800 to 900 AD, a lot of their cities, some of them really large with tens of thousands of people, they collapsed. We call this the Maya collapse. This is a question that we as archaeologists and academics have been struggling with for a long time. What happened? So Tikal, okay, the Star Wars moon base place, that's a good example. Huge city, 80,000 people, maybe even 100,000 people who were living there, something like that in the general area. Between about 800 and 1,000, you're going from a vibrant city to nobody really living there. And it gets to be overgrown with jungle, and then explorers find it in the 1800s. Mm-hmm. What happened? So this is this idea of a lost city. This is really where it comes from. It comes from the Maya, explorers in the 1800s. And I mean, talk about romantic exploration, hacking your way through the jungle, very Indiana Jones.
Yeah, that's
and
pretty
here
cool.
is a 100-foot high pyramid that no one has explored before. I mean, that's the reality of early days of Maya archaeology. So this fed into this question, what happened? It fed into a lot of crazy ideas about maybe what happened, that they disappeared. Well, they did disappear from those places, but they moved on. So one of the things I'm writing about in the book is, what factors went into this? I think there were tipping points. It had to do with climate for sure, because we have records of drought. We know that water was hard to come by in these places. It still is.
Yeah.
So you can understand how these tipping points might come up. But big populations basically couldn't sustain themselves in some of these places. And I think also the political system kind of fell apart. We can also track in the records, the last 100 years of this era there was so much warfare. And there had always been conflict and like medieval history, but you see it ramping up. And in the last few decades there, it's just incessant warfare. And I think the system just breaks down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the Maya had a lot of agency in deciding what to do, the people. And I think they just voted with their feet and decided to
just left,
go off to do other things.
True. Yeah.
And so this is one of the things that I really want to try to do in my narrative about this, is that it wasn't like some external thing that came, UFOs with beams taking people away. It's that the Maya were going through a crisis, and they had to make some very, very hard decisions, no doubt, to do something about their dire situation in many places, and they decided to leave.
Have you seen the hieroglyph of a guy who's looks like he's in a rocket ship looking up though? that was the only thing I remember from Ancient Aliens. They would show that 100 times.
Oh yeah, they keep showing that.
Dude, he's in a rocket ship. He took off. You're like, oh.
Right. So this is the famous or infamous image of a Maya rocket. That is actually a lid of a coffin of a sarcophagus of a great ruler whose name was Pakal. And he ruled a place that we know today as Palenque, beautiful, beautiful site in Mexico. And yeah, when they found his tomb in the 1950s, you know, this beautiful coffin with this carving, there was kind of an interesting situation. After they found it, of course, nobody could read the hieroglyphs, right, in the 50s or 60s. There were all these texts around the coffin. It wasn't until the 70s that we could sort of read the name. Maybe in the 80s and 90s, we could read actually what it was saying. It was talking about this great king, his birth date, his death date, all of his ancestors, kind of waiting for him in the afterlife and all this stuff. The scene on the top is of Pakal, the king. He is kind of taking off in a way, right? But what he's doing is he's raising as the sun in the east. He's being resurrected, and he's not in a rocket. He's just emerging out of the earth, out of the kind of this maw, this cave, rising up as the sun into the sky. And it's a really elaborate imagery, but that's in essence what the ceremony. And this was completely genuine. This was not some kind of tourist thing for us. Yeah. This was for the village. And they constructed an altar in the plaza of the ancient ruins. I mean, talk about atmospheric. I mean, it was wild. And it was an all-night ceremony to renew rain. And it's called the Chachak, which means to summon Chak, the rain deity, who's a deity we see in the ancient art, by the way. And as one of the, I was young. I was 9 years old. The shaman, called a Khmen, a doer, he needed kids to be part of the ceremony. So he asked me to be one of the kids that would rotate around every, like an hour here, an hour there. There were a lot of us to sit under this table, makeshift table. It was his altar. And it was a four-sided model of the universe with the four world directions. And I was one of the 4 kids that sat under the table facing in the world directions to call the rain god. And I had to sit there for an hour in the middle of the night going, wah, 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 wah.
How old were you?
Wah. I was 9.
Whoa.
I was a frog.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I was calling the rain god. And we were all sitting around going, wah, 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 wah. And, you know, there's fermented drinks going around, and it's just wild. You know, no women were allowed. It was just men and the boys. And, I mean, I was a kid from North Carolina, and I was all of a sudden, you know, kind of in this thing.
Yeah.
And my dad was, you know, taking pictures and being the anthropologist. And I was just sort of going there, what am I doing?